The problem with China is there's this thing called Han chauvinism.
What's
you know,
that?
because the dominant race in China, China is made up of 55 different ethnic categories.
Okay.
And the majority are what's known as Han Chinese. Now, that's a bogus term in many ways because it just literally means people of the Han dynasty. So if you were in the Han dynasty, you'd be a person of the Han dynasty. It's complete rubbish. And to be honest, I don't think all Chinese people are Han. I don't. But there is this thing, Han Chinese, and the thing, and it's an ethno-state. This is the thing. It really is an ethno-state. This is one of the problems we have. China and Chinese. They're like you get called Chinese, but I'm not really Chinese. I'm not from China. Do you know what I mean?
You're from Singapore, so
yeah. I'm ethnically, you know what I mean? And it was never called China until 100 years ago. China is a white Western word. It was the great Qing dynasty, the great Ming dynasty, the great Tang dynasty. And the whole idea is it was an empire, and it was diverse within that empire. When the last dynasty got overthrown, there's been, and especially the Chinese Communist Party have done this, there's been this kind of push to homogenize it. Like the amount of oppressing they do of Uyghur people, of Tibetan people, the whole thing is predicated on fierce nationalism now. It's quite ugly. It really is. And yeah, and I don't like I say, I don't want to generalize about 1.4 billion people because obviously that's not the case. And there was a mixed race girl in China. She was half African, half Chinese, right? And she'd grown up all her life in China, and she got in the final of this big national TV singing competition, right? And apparently on Weibo, which is a Chinese Twitter, she got serious racial abuse. And she was interviewed. One of the things she said, which I thought was very interesting, she said, yes, I was shocked because I never experienced anything like that growing up. So you can be in some neighborhoods and they're totally accepting, they're totally the coolest people in the world. But yeah, when it kicks off badly, and it's quite insular.
And that's a problem. And even with when Africans were being turfed out from their homes in China, they were being forced testing, they were kicked out of restaurants and banned from restaurants, people giving letters to black people telling them not to come into their establishment.
Yeah, even though they paid for their rent, everything. And because I want to make that very clear, is that when it comes to that conversation, I feel like there's never this sense of belief that an African person could be purely just innocent and this is happening. Yeah. You know, there's always this kind of conversation like, oh, maybe they did something, maybe they didn't pay. They paid up. They've come to that area of China to study, a lot of them to study in whatever technology or science or work, okay? They paid in full because I was looking at what the things Chinese Africans people need to do in order to get into China, okay? You have to make sure that when you get your Chinese visa, you have to take a health test. We're talking about you take a health test 6 months before you even file. You have to take another health test before, a month before you actually enter China. You then also need to get a letter from your police saying that you're not a criminal. You have to go above and beyond to get into China. So for those Africans that are in China, I would like to say that for the majority of them, I mean, I'm generalizing here, I'm pretty sure that they're not criminals, they're not sick, they're not trying to do anything bad whatsoever.
Otherwise they would be in the country.
Otherwise they wouldn't even be in the country.
I mean, I had a whole row with a mainland Chinese girl on Facebook the other week. She was going about, America's much more racist. Look at Trump building his wall. I said, yeah, his wall is to keep migrants out, but the People's Republic of China does not accept migrants.
I think it's very interesting because as someone who has been to China, as someone who has been to Africa a number of times, I recently was in Ghana in December. There are so many Chinese people in Ghana. No Ghanaian is treating them any bad way at all. All. They're like, okay, you're doing your thing, cool. To a point where they're creating a Chinatown in Ghana.
Yeah.
Do you know, no one's saying you can't do that. I mean, there might be some people that are like, what is going on? What is happening? But no one's physically doing anything to Chinese people to stop that from happening. And then you see the treatment of Africans in China, and most of them are there to study as well. So it's not like they're just there doing nothing.
I mean, Africa's being recolonized by the Chinese. And when the Chinese come and they're building, they don't hire Africans. So it's not like if they're providing work for Africans. Now, there are a number of establishments in Nigeria owned by the Chinese, hotels, restaurants. They banned Nigerians from coming in, Africans from coming in. And the Nigerian government had to come and shut them down. They're practicing racism in a country that's not theirs.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, because you know what's quite interesting? my family come from the Caribbean, so Grenada and Dominica to be exact. Now, in the last, I'd say 15, 20 years, all the infrastructure projects in the Caribbean are built by the Chinese.
That's right, same in Barbados.
Stadiums, all the stadiums, the roads, Now, the reason I think eventually the Chinese government will come out and say, they'll make a statement saying this isn't right, because eventually it will end up costing them too much money.
Yes.
Caribbean and African powers, they need an ally, and China's their ally, because China comes through with the money and China will build for you. I couldn't believe it seeing so many Chinese people in the Caribbean.
Yeah, it's
they
crazy.
were all in construction.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, it's really, it goes to show you that money has no colour, because a lot of these countries, they probably want to say something, but the Chinese government is powerful. They have them by the...
China is incredibly powerful. I mean, 4/5 of the world's bricks are made in China, I think. Our mobile phones, all the parts are made in China. And they're made by people who are paid dirt poor wages in factories as well.
One thing I would definitely say, though, is, China is very powerful, but I would say that a lot of the world's resources comes from Africa. You talk about mobile phones, coltan, everything, the laptop I'm talking to, coltan derives from Congo. Right? So technically, in terms of wealth, Congo should be the richest country in the world. Obviously, it's not because of how the government runs it. But my thing is that there's like a knock-on effect, because the resources that China gets is from Africa. And that's what I'm saying. They have to be very careful.
Like the little kid in class who suddenly got big and wants to beat everyone. Do you know what I mean? I think you're right. I do think up until like last year, they thought this is their moment. They're going to be the primo superpower on the planet. And they thought their soft power was attracting people as well, and their money. But then the Hong Kong thing happened, and now COVID is a disaster for them. Yeah. Because it did come from them. And, I don't, it gets into a lot of stigmatization of ordinary mainland Chinese people, which I don't want to do. But there's no doubt about it. The People's Republic of China has a lot of responsibility, because they've had warnings in the past. They had SARS and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot they need to sort out, and they try to cover it up, and they bagged all those doctors. I mean, this is one thing I will say about mainland China. For all I'm saying about some of the bravest people I know in the world live in China. These are human rights lawyers, labour workers, civilian journalists. The risks they take, and so many of them get locked up, and their families get locked up. It breaks my heart, frankly. They are so brave, some of them,
Last Wednesday, I put up a post, and it was by a woman called Dr. Arikana Kwao, and she actually was the ambassador for the African continent to the US, as well as being in, she's in very much high profile diplomatic circles. She did a video last week, basically warning President Xi that actually, you mistreating Africans is not cool. Because you know what, you got to remember, there is 10 million people in the country that I inhabit who are Chinese, and you seem to be forgetting that. So whatever it is that you're doing, make this right, because this is not right. Your people are coming over to the African continent, and we are welcoming them with broad arms. So why is it that the same doesn't happen in reverse? So that voice is definitely beginning to happen. And I know that a number of African countries have already put in complaints to the Chinese government.
There's a myth that Chinese people certainly put about, and I think that white people think about Chinese people, and Chinese people put this about themselves, that we don't like to cause trouble. Well, you only have to look at the history of China to see that's completely rubbish. The history of China is wars, uprising, mayhems, civil wars, complete chaos. So, definitely can cause trouble. I can only put it down to anti-blackness, which is worldwide. And I think there's a sense that there's a lot of us. I think we're the most populous race on earth. And we're so busy fighting each other for survival sometimes. I just don't think. And the race dialogue in East Asia is appalling, I have to say. And the recent thing with the Africans in Guangzhou in China, it does not surprise me. Is it W.B. Du Bois?
Yeah.
You know, he wrote whole passages about this, about how the Africans and the Chinese, he called us like brothers in bondage. Do you know what I mean? Because he said both of us, bodies broken under the back of white supremacy, labouring for them. You know what I mean? Like indentured labour, slavery, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's true. I really do. We're both peoples are the workhorses of the planet. But, you know, for some reason, we've just kind of been divided and everything. And, you know, and the thing is about how it's become a black thing in China, because, you know, that's just simple racism. Black people get a blame for everything, basically.